What kind of parents were your parents?
My parents was real strict. Not only did my parents raise me, but the whole community, because that's the way we was brought up.
That's the Pughesville way, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. And if you call a person a lie, you got to kill him.
Wow.
You got whooped two ways. Where you was at, you got a whooping. They carry you home and tell your parents what you did. You got a double whammy.
So there's a very strong code of discipline for the children of Pughesville.
You had to be disciplined. You had to say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, and no, sir, regardless of what color you were.
Right.
And my parents didn't play. And my father didn't have nothing but a third grade education. But he could out-count me. He could do algebra.
No kidding.
Because when he came along, they had what you call a blue back speller. And they had everything in a blue back speller that he went through it from front to back.
Let's talk about your childhood, the things you did for fun. I know you did a lot of chores and work at home, but what kind of things did you do for fun? I know you're involved in some activities at school. Tell us about that.
Well, when I was going to school, I went to Oak Park Elementary first.
Is that in Pughesville?
I was in Pughesville.
Okay, Oak Park, okay.
Oak Park. We had Miss Librarian, Miss Long,
Oh,
and Miss Purcell. 3 teachers.
okay.
They taught us first, second, and third grade.
Oh my.
And when we moved to Florence-Villa, I was in 4th grade. Miss Somerville was our teacher. When I went to 5th grade, Miss Peterson was our teacher. And when I got promoted to 6th grade, Miss Librarian, who was principal over there in Oak Park, she was our 6th grade teacher.
Okay.
And she kept everything in perspective places because she was the principal there. When you were going to school at that time, that you couldn't play around.
Yeah, different, very different.
It was different. It was different. It was different back then. They cared about us, and they had a strong love for us. But we thought it was wrong. But we didn't get in no trouble.
And you now know that that was because they loved you.
They loved us.
Yeah. You finished school, and then you went in the military. So tell us about that. What branch of service, where were you, and what were you doing there?
I went to school, and I went to the Army in 1956.
Okay.
November the 24th, I was inducted into the Armed Forces in Jacksonville. As we being inducted, we going through the line with our shirts off, we get shot in both arms.
Ooh.
Oh, what these people do? I enjoyed it. I had my basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia. I had my IIT in Fort Sam Houston, Texas, in med school. And I loved it.
Yeah.
Because I was a medic. They taught me everything. I could give shots. I could read x-rays. The Army prepared me for a whole lot of things I was doing when I got out of service.
Well, thank you. I began life in 1941 at Bartow Memorial Hospital. My family came here, my great-granddad came here in the late 1920s, and in 1931, my grandfather and my parents and I moved to Bartow. no, in 1931 there was no me. My grandfather and parents moved to Bartow, and Granddad and Great-Granddad started the Polk County Democrat in 1931. Dad was in college at that time, Florida Southern College, as was Mother. That's where they met. And so the Polk County Democrat remained in the family for 75 years, which is, it's certainly not a record, but it's a little longer than the average newspaper ownership. As I say, I was born here in 1941, and despite the efforts of my parents to encourage me not to follow them into the newspaper business just because they were afraid that I thought that that was my obligation, the more they tried to get me to look at some other field, the more determined I was to go into the newspaper business. So when I went to Florida State University, I majored in government, which is one of the most important things, arguably the most important thing that newspapers cover. And as I say, worked at the Tallahassee Democrat for 3 of the 4 years. My freshman year, I worked as a student assistant at 75 cents an hour in the FSU News Bureau. And I have confessed that it's the only job where I did not earn the money that they paid me. It was sort of a nothing job, and I did next to nothing. And then at the end of my freshman year, I got a job at the Tallahassee Democrat as an entry-level reporter. And that job paid $1 an hour because the newspaper came under the federal wage hour law, which the college didn't. So I have observed since then that I'm one of the few people who ever left a government job for a newspaper job because it paid more money. So I've stayed there and learned a great deal at the Tallahassee Democrat. We had a very small staff, given that it was the Florida State Capitol newspaper. And as a result of that, I had a chance to work most of the news beats there.
That is great. That is just great. You know, we talked about the fact that your parents wondered if that's the career that you should go in, but I realized as we're talking, that's in your DNA.
It is for a fact.
It's just your DNA. That's just who you are.
And I didn't realize at the time that they were trying so hard to talk me into considering other fields for the sole reason that they didn't want me to feel like it was an expectation, and which, as far as I can remember, I never felt that way. And they later told me they were delighted when I said no, I was going to be a newspaper man.
I grew up in Gainesville, Florida, which is Alachua County, a very industrious area, because as you're aware, the University of Florida is there, which means the whole environment is affected one way or another by the university there. At our school, we had a K through 12. It was Lincoln Elementary, Junior High, Senior High School. So once you enrolled at the elementary level, you were there. I can't help but to think about the gracious teachers we had during that time. They were really caring, very caring. And you were almost like you were away from home when you were with them. You felt that. Your teachers knew you, you saw your teachers. They were in your churches, in your community, in your stores. So they were in constant contact with your parents. So that was a very good plus. The comfortableness there, the closeness in securing an education, the coordination between the parents and the school. I was in Gainesville until I had my first teaching assignment. And my youngest brother was there. And we were so close. He always wanted to do whatever I did. So he was in teaching also. And he came to Sebring, where I had my first teaching position.
You know, I want to go backwards just a little bit to your college days. We've certainly celebrated Mary Bethune-Cookman a lot this year. And she was very involved in the suffrage movement. I wonder if you have any memories of her involvement or discussing her.
I remember when I first went to Bethune-Cookman. She was alive, I think, first 2 years. Very gracious woman, stately. Her home was on the other end of the campus. We would see her. She was just a precious person. We had the Bethune-Cookman Gospel Choir to our church this year. And they asked me to give the welcome. And I told them the story. They were overwhelmed. They said, we've never heard a welcome like that, where you included some of the history of Bethune-Cookman. I said, well, it's It was always there. And that's the way she was. Pleasure.
So you've graduated from college and you're teaching. Somewhere along the way, you have met Mr. Anthony Green. Tell us about that. How did that come about?
Well, we knew Anthony at a distance from the school in Sebring, because that was my first teaching assignment, was in Highlands County. And I was living at the time with my brother. My brother and I had really started buying this home. And later on, even after he married, and we had my mother there, I lived there. I still continued to live there. So his wife, his name was Gracie at the time, she was going to summer school at A&M. Well, I never cared that much for A&M. I love Cookman. But she asked me, she said, why won't you go with me this year? I said, well, you know how I feel about A&M. She said, but yeah, just come on and go with me, Ora. And so I did. So my sister-in-law then got busy. She'd invite him for dinner. So one night she invited him for dinner. Well, in the dining room, there was a living room and a dining room. They had an old couch on the floor in the dining room. Well, in as much as he was her company, I would sit on the floor and let them study together. Well, he was there this time, and the voice said, I heard this voice say, that would make you a good husband. I didn't tell nobody, because we knew he had a girlfriend, because he had told us, you know, that some of his girlfriend was from Georgia. And so I didn't say a thing to nobody. So here again, later on, she invited him again. The same voice spoke to me.
Lovely.
So that night, I told her. She said, girl, that's the Lord. I said, what? She said, that's the Lord. I said, neither one of us are thinking about marriage. Neither one. She said, but that's what it is. And she got busy and played Cupid, and the rest is history. From that time on, but believe it or not, after Anthony and I, we talked, we explored in many avenues. We talked at length. And I guess I really met him in July. August, we had decided to get married.
Lovely.
So when I went home, my family said, get married. We were engaged. We got engaged on my birthday, which was September 9th. And then the 26th, we got married on September.
We were talking off camera too about baseball. As a kid, you said you weren't able to get in to see the Tigers play?
No, they finally let us in, and they put the bleachers on the west side of the stadium, and it was hard to get a chance to see them because we couldn't mingle with them. And on Florida Avenue, they had two-story buildings, and they had porches up, and the people would charge us a quarter, and we would go upstairs and look at the play. And I used to always go to see Hank Greenberg knock the ball out the stadium. And they just didn't want us to meet with them, and then finally we got a chance to go in.
So what year did you graduate from high school?
In 1946, June of 46.
Oh, so you were in high school during the war years.
Yes, and just about all of my classmates went into the service but me. I don't know why they didn't call, 'cause I stayed in the A class, but my rating was 1A on my registration card, on my card, but they never did call me. So I tried to go into the Coast Guard, but they never answered me till after the war. Then they said that they didn't need anybody else, but then I found out that no minorities could be in the Coast Guard, and that's the reason why they never would answer me. I wanted to go to college, but I couldn't afford it. My parents didn't have the money, and my daddy bought a house and was building the correction. He didn't buy it. He was building the house and paying for it as he go. And I had a job at Montgomery Ward, and I was making $25.50 per week. And I had married my wife in 1950, January 1950. And my daddy wanted me to get a home, so we moved in with him. My wife was making $13.50 a week, so we gave my daddy $5 a week to stay there and eat. And my wife and I would give the rest of the money to the church and go to the movies. Then I would take my $25.50 per week and put in a house. And I bought a lot from my sister. I received $200 and some from my income tax, and I gave it to my sister for a lot on Whitehurst Street. And every week I'd take that $25 and put in the house. And we built that house, and I had never built a house in my life. And I drew out some plan on a piece of paper. I bought my permit for $5. We had a lamp light, a handsaw, a hammer, a square, and a lever. And when I get off from work, we would build a house. And during those days, when they sent in furniture at Montgomery Ward, it would come in wooden crates. I'd get the wood, pull the nails out of it, tie it on my bicycle, and ride it home. And I used that for my subflow. And it took us about a year, but as soon as we got one room completed in the bath, we moved in. And just every week, just buy lumber, and that's the way we built the house. And at the corner of Pine in Florida, I saw a lot of whites and a policeman. And I was happy because I saw that policeman. And he yelled at me and used some words that I didn't like, but I couldn't. I had fear. And I came home and told my parents that I wanted to be a policeman to prove that you didn't have to be that type of person to be a policeman. And my mother said, you would never be one in Lincoln because they're not going to have it. And she worked for the mayor. And she went back and told him. And he said, well, have him to come to the city commissioner meeting my daddy. And my father went down there. And that's how we got started. And Mr. Flanagan said, the only thing you have to do is pass the test and you would be hired. But my parents still didn't want me to be a policeman, but they opened it up for the other one. So I never did tell them. I took the test and passed and was hired before I let them know that I was going to be a police officer.
We moved first to Florida, and the city basically was Orlando. And after elementary school and reaching close to, I guess, my third grade, I was moved to Plant City. And then, after my dad changed his jobs, we came to Bartow. Mm-hmm. And I was in the 5th grade, I believe. Yeah.
From the Bronx.
From the Bronx.
To Orlando, to Plant City, and then Bartow.
Right. I started the Bartow schools about the 5th grade. I believe the teacher was Agnes Phillips. And the reason I remember this so well, we used to have activity outside, physical therapy, and we used to go out and play. Well, we were kind of wrestling around, playing one day, and I had my green shirt on that I liked. And a fellow by the name of Jerome Williams, he tore my shirt. Well, he was about my size, or maybe a little bigger. So I whipped up on him a little bit to pay back. Agnes Phillips, my teacher, didn't approve of whipping up. So she took me across the hall and gave me my first spanking.
Wow.
Well, that's a learning lesson, isn't it?
Wow. That you remember that. That's
Oh,
very,
yeah,
it made an impression.
My first spanking.
What happened to the young man that tore your shirt?
Jerome, well, other than not liking me, we just kept our distance. Everything was quiet after that. I didn't have a lot of shirts. And
That was a big deal.
that was a big deal, yeah.
My great uncle came to Horse Creek. Now, Horse Creek is about 1.5 miles north of Davenport.
Okay.
He came and he actually had a land grant for 1883, but he only moved here in 1885. And his sister was my great-great-grandmother. And so she arrived in about 1897. So now those are my maternal great-grandparents.
Okay.
My great-grandparents, whom I came to Osceola County, and then that's where my grandmother was born. Then my grandmother and this is my paternal grandparents, and they were married in 1910 in Osceola County and moved to Davenport out on Lake St. Charles. And my grandfather built the house that I grew up in 1921. So next year it will be 100 years old. And so I'm very excited about that. And my sister and I grew up there. They actually moved the house to town so that my sister and I could go to school because there were no school buses or anything out. And if you know, Lake St. Charles is out near the Heart of Florida Regional Hospital on 27. And so that was kind of how we arrived here. Now, my maternal grandparents came in 1900. So this is my my grandmother and my grandfather, my great-grandmother, my grandfather, that were my grandmother's parents. And my grandmother lived with us, so I enjoyed having life with her. And I knew 3 of my 4 grandparents, and that's probably unusual.
Well, let's talk about your parents.
Oh,
Now, your
okay.
parents, we've talked about your great-grandparents, your grandfather and grandmother, and now your parents. Oh my goodness, look at this sweet picture. Tell us who we're looking at here.
Well, the one on the left is my Uncle Vance, and he was the cabinet maker. He grew up to be a cabinet maker, and he also made boats for some of the local fishing sites around Polk County. That's my dad in the middle, and my dad actually worked for the post office in his later years, but early on he worked in this citrus industry, and he had bees and cattle and spent a lot of his time until his late years. Actually, his cattle and the groves were on that same property. So, and that's the other one was my aunt. This is my mom and dad, and my dad was Grady Lewis Ruis, and my mother was Matilda Frazier. And she thought that her name was Frazier, but her father came from Ireland and changed his name on the way from Philadelphia to Florida. His name was really Ambrose Fagan, but she did not know that until after he passed away.
How interesting. That
and
is so
she worked in the citrus industry and alongside my dad with all those, you know, with the bees and the cattle and the farming. And she also was like a president of the PTA, and she was a treasurer for this church, and then she had plenty of time to spend her extra time, of course. She sewed all the clothes for my sister and I as we were growing up.
Oh, how lovely.
I don't know when she slept. I have no idea when she slept.
See, in 1962, you and Peter Allen Rust were married. Y'all were married for 55 years until his death in 2018. Tell us more about meeting Pete and how you all got together.
Well, actually, we really knew we really got together more at church because we sang in the choir. We were in the same Sunday school class. And quite frankly, I couldn't stand him. So I'm sorry to say, but he played football, and he was very pompous and had an ego, I guess.
Oh my, oh my.
So anyway, and then until he, then he went to the University of Florida. I went to FSU for a little while, and so we, just didn't cross paths that much until later on. And then it was, most interesting. He joined the Marine Corps, and then of course, he was much more interesting. So I guess. So anyway, then we were married while he was in the Marine Corps, and we traveled 4.5 years. He was in school most of the time. So we left on our honeymoon to San Diego, California, because that's where he had been transferred to.
Actually, we didn't know we were poor. We worked a lot, but we played a lot. I can recall when my daddy's sister, she lived right next door to us. And the boys would get ready to say play ball.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure whether you've heard of rag ball.
I don't think I know what that is. Tell me. What is a rag ball?
My aunt had a knack of getting an old sock that you would put on your feet. And she would fill it with sand. And she would say, pack the sand into the sock and sew it with a needle and thread so tight until it felt like a baseball.
That is incredible. Another talent.
And
the talented Woodards.
Yeah, so basically between the two houses there was a road, and all of the boys played what we call rag ball.
Now I know. Now I know what a rag ball is.
Just like baseball.
Just like baseball. So that was the fun part.
Yeah.
That's how you played. So let's talk about, we've touched on the education. Tell me, I know that you were at Union Academy, and you graduated from Union Academy, and then let's talk about college and school after Union Academy. Where did you attend college?
After Union Academy, I attended Florida A&M. I got my BS. I went back to say Florida A&M, and got my master's. And all of this was after I got married and all. After that, I went on to and got what we call our EDS degree, Educational Specialist from Rollins College in 1984.
Nice.